There was a man who once told me he wasn't addicted, he just liked it. And at first, that was true. He tried it once out of curiosity, then twice for fun, then 3 times because he was sad, then 4 times because he couldn't sleep without it anymore. The scariest part isn't the moment he became addicted. The scariest part is that he never even realized when he fell into it. Because addiction doesn't arrive like a storm. It comes like a drizzle, drop by drop, gentle and quiet, until you're soaked to the bone and still think it hasn't started raining. And by the time you realize it, you're already standing in a very dark place, looking back and no longer able to see the way out. Today, I'm not going to tell you about statistics or dry medical reports. I'm going to take you through the 7 depths of addiction, from that first harmless sense of curiosity to the abyss where so many have fallen without anyone noticing. And somewhere in those 7 levels, you might recognize someone you know, maybe even yourself. Level 1, curiosity and experimentation. No one steps onto the path of addiction with a warning sign in front of them. It usually begins with something very ordinary, even innocent: curiosity. Imagine a 16-year-old student being invited by friends to try a cigarette for the first time after school. He doesn't think much of it, he just thinks, why not try it once? As simple as tasting a new dish at a recently opened restaurant nearby. There's nothing frightening in that moment, nothing that looks like the beginning of a serious problem. And the truth is, at this first level, it really isn't a problem yet. According to psychological research, the stage of curiosity and experimentation is something most people go through at least once in their lives across many different things. Some people try alcohol for the first time at a family year-end party. Others place a small bet because their friends make it look fun. Some download a video game just to pass an afternoon. Our brains are naturally wired to seek novelty because curiosity has been a tool for human learning and evolution for thousands of years. The issue isn't that you're curious. The issue is how your brain feels after that curiosity is satisfied. When someone tries an addictive substance for the first time, the brain releases a surge of dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for pleasure and reward. The feeling may only last a few minutes, but it's strong enough for the brain to remember and quietly ask, when can we do that again? At this stage, the person is still completely in control. Life remains normal. Work, school, relationships, nothing is affected. They can stop at any time without discomfort. But this is the subtle danger of level 1. Because everything seems normal, no one pays attention. No one looks in the mirror and says, I'm starting down a path that could change my life. They simply think they're relaxing, having fun, living a little more fully than usual. Most people who stay at this level will never go further. They try it once and move on, like closing a book that doesn't suit their taste. But for some, the feeling is too pleasant, or life outside feels too dull, or the pain within is too heavy, and they begin to return. A second time, a third time, and that's when level 1 quietly begins to slip into the next stage, without them even realizing it. Level 2, habit and attachment. If level 1 is the first time you touch a flame and feel its warmth, then level 2 is when you begin to seek out that flame whenever you feel cold. The difference may seem small, but inside the brain, something has completely changed. At this stage, people are no longer just trying. It becomes repetition. And repetition, no matter what it involves, has the power to form habits. Neuroscience calls this the process of reinforcing neural pathways. Each time the brain experiences something pleasurable, it carves a small groove into memory. Much like a wheel rolling over the same dirt road again and again, eventually creates a deep track. And once that groove is deep enough, the brain will automatically steer toward it whenever familiar situations arise, without conscious thought. Imagine a 30-year-old woman with a stressful job who pours herself a glass of wine every evening to relax. At first, she only drinks on weekends. then Fridays, then Thursdays, then any day with a tense meeting. She doesn't get drunk. She doesn't lose control. She still wakes up on time, goes to work, and is a good mother to her child. From the outside, nothing seems concerning, but internally, an invisible thread has begun to form between stress and that glass of wine. And on days when she doesn't have it, she feels strangely restless without being able to explain why. This is the most dangerous sign of level 2. It's not that you crave it, but that you begin to need it just to feel normal. Psychologists call this emotional attachment. When a behavior or substance becomes a tool for regulating our emotions, it stops being a choice and gradually becomes a necessity. Someone addicted to social media at this level doesn't scroll out of boredom. They scroll because not doing so makes them feel anxious and uneasy for no clear reason. A gambling addict doesn't place bets to get rich. They do it because the thrill of waiting for the outcome is the only thing that lifts them out of inner emptiness. What makes level 2 extremely hard to recognize is that outwardly, life still appears intact. Nothing has fallen apart. No one is complaining. And because of that, the person often reassures themselves that everything is fine, that they're still in control, that they can stop anytime they want. That sentence sounds familiar, because most people who have gone on to more severe stages have said exactly that, right here at level 2, just before things began to slip out of their hands. Level 2 is not the point of no return, but it is the point where if no one notices and speaks up, the road ahead becomes much steeper and far more slippery. Level 3, avoidance and escape. There's a question few people are willing to ask themselves directly. What am I running from? Because answering it requires a kind of courage that, at level 3, people often no longer have. If at level 2, addiction is still a habit that helps someone feel better, then by level 3, it has taken on a completely different role. It no longer brings joy. It becomes the only way they know to escape pain. Think of a young man who has just gone through a breakup, or failed at work, or is carrying a wound from childhood that was never healed. He doesn't drink to have fun. He drinks so he doesn't have to think. So the painful silence in his mind can be filled with something, anything, even if only temporarily. When the alcohol kicks in, those heavy thoughts sink, and he can breathe for a while. That feeling isn't happiness, but it's enough to get him through the night. And that is the most subtle trap of level 3, because it works, at least in the short term. The brain learns a deeply dangerous lesson. Whenever it hurts, go here. Whenever you're afraid, go here. Whenever you're lonely, angry, or don't know what to do with yourself, go here. And over time, the person's ability to tahamlo, difficult emotions, weakens, because they've never truly sat with their pain long enough to learn how to move through it. Avoidance doesn't make pain disappear. It only pushes it behind you, where it quietly grows a little larger each time you turn away. Psychologists call this emotional avoidance. Instead of confronting the source of pain, people try to mute it with a substance or a behavior. What's troubling is that this mechanism isn't limited to alcohol or drugs. It shows up in people who overwork just to avoid going home and thinking, those who overeat to fill an inner emptiness, or those who scroll on their phones until 2 or 3 a.m. just to avoid lying still in the dark with themselves. At this stage, the boundary between the real world and the escape world becomes increasingly blurred. People begin investing more into the artificial reality addiction provides, while gradually withdrawing from relationships, responsibilities, and genuine emotions. They are still physically present, but mentally, they are somewhere else. And that's when the people around them start to sense that something is wrong. Not because they've done anything obviously bad, but because they are slowly becoming a stranger in their own home. Level 4, loss of control. There is a moment many addicts remember clearly, even if they rarely speak about it. It's the first time they look in the mirror, promise themselves they'll stop today, and then by evening, find themselves doing exactly what they swore they wouldn't do. Not because they are weak, not because they don't want to change, but because at this point, their will is no longer in the driver's seat. This is the boundary that both medicine and psychology recognize as the point of loss of control. Before this stage, a person can still choose. They can skip a day, a week, even if it's uncomfortable, it's still possible. But by level 4, the brain has been reshaped to the extent that craving is no longer just a feeling. It becomes a biological command, as powerful as hunger or thirst. Science explains it like this. After prolonged exposure to an addictive substance or behavior, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making and impulse control, becomes significantly weakened. Meanwhile, the more primitive brain regions tied to desire and survival grow more active than ever. Put simply, the part of the brain that knows this is harmful gets quieter, while the part that says, "I need this right now," starts shouting louder than everything else. Loss of control doesn't mean you don't know what you're doing. It means you know exactly what you're doing, you don't want to do it, and you do it anyway. And that's where the real pain lies. Understanding this is why people have begun to move away from blaming addicts as lacking willpower or not trying hard enough. A man who sells his wife's wedding ring for gambling money doesn't do it because he doesn't love her. He does it because, in that moment, the craving has taken full control, and every value he once held dear is temporarily pushed aside. He will regret it afterward. He may cry. He may hate himself. But the next day, the loop can begin again. At this stage, addicts often start to lie, not because they are inherently bad people, but because they are trying to hide the growing gap between who they want to be and who they are becoming. They lie to their families, to their friends, and most importantly, to themselves. They build reasons, explanations, and justifications to rationalize their actions, so they don't have to face the truth that they've lost control of their own lives. And when that facade begins to crack, when loved ones start to see the truth, that is often when the addict doesn't run toward the light, but dives deeper into the darkness. Because shame, self-blame, and a sense of hopelessness are exactly what push them further down into the next level. Level 5. Darkness and fragmentation of the self. Inside a person at level 5, there are two selves living in one body. One remembers who they used to be, what they once dreamed of, how they loved and were loved. The other knows only one thing: do whatever it takes to get through today. Psychologists call this ego fragmentation. It's not an exaggeration. When someone lives too long in conflict between what they know is right and what they actually do, the mind begins to split as a form of self-protection. They learn to separate feelings from actions. They learn to do harmful things without feeling the pain. And gradually, the part that used to be their conscience, the voice that reminded them of their core values, goes quiet. Think of a father who once took his child to school every morning, who used to tell bedtime stories every night. At this stage, he still loves his child, but in each moment, the craving is stronger than that love. He lies to his wife about money. He misses his child's school performance. He makes promises and breaks them so often that the people who love him most stop expecting anything at all. But instead of feeling guilt and changing, he builds a different story in his mind, a version of reality where he is still a good man, just someone in difficult circumstances, someone no one truly understands. Self-deception doesn't begin with cunning. It begins with desperation. When a person can no longer bear the gap between who they want to be and who they are, they try to close that gap by changing the story instead of changing themselves. This is also the stage where isolation becomes deepest, not because the person doesn't want connection, but because real connection requires honesty. And at this point, honesty is the most painful thing they could face. It's easier to avoid old friends who remember who they used to be. Easier to stay among others who are also in the dark. People who don't ask questions, who don't expect explanations. From a spiritual perspective, this stage can feel like a battle between light and darkness within a single person. The darkness isn't some external demon. It is made up of all the wounded, rejected, and hidden parts of the self, now trying to be seen in the only way they know, through addictive behavior. People at level 5 don't always look like they're falling apart. They may still go to work, still laugh, still sit at family dinners, but their eyes are a little emptier. And if you look closely enough, you'll notice something has dimmed behind that gaze, a small flame they no longer have the strength to keep alive. Level 6, spiritual emptiness. There are people who reach this level and still have money, still have a place to live, still have loved ones by their side. But if you ask them whether life has any meaning, they look at you like someone trying to recall a dream that faded long ago. Because at level 6, what's lost is not wealth or status. What's lost is the feeling that life is worth living. Researchers in both spirituality and psychology have observed a common phenomenon among those struggling with severe addiction, a state often described as spiritual dryness. It's when everything that once gave a person a sense of value becomes meaningless. Music no longer moves them. A loved one's embrace no longer feels warm. A sunrise, a child's laughter, a good meal, all become things they can see but no longer feel. As if there were an invisible pane of glass separating them from the rest of the world. This happens because after years of the brain being overstimulated by artificial surges of dopamine from addictive behaviors, the natural emotional system becomes nearly numb. The brain no longer knows how to generate joy from the simple things in life. It has forgotten. And the void left behind by that natural joy grows so vast that nothing can truly fill it, not even the very thing they are addicted to. This is the deepest tragedy of level 6. The thing they run to in order to escape emptiness is the very thing that deepens that emptiness day by day. Many people at this stage begin to ask questions they cannot answer. Why am I here? What am I living for? Does anyone truly need me? These aren't abstract philosophical questions. They are cries for help from a soul that has drifted too far from itself and can no longer find the way back. Addiction recovery experts call this a crisis of meaning, and they consider it one of the most dangerous points because when a person no longer sees a reason to protect themselves, the final boundary begins to disappear. The loneliness at level 6 is not ordinary loneliness. A person can sit in a crowded room and still feel like they are standing alone on another planet. They have lost connection not only with others, but with themselves, with the values that once defined them, with the deepest part within that spirituality might call the soul or true self. And strangely, it is sometimes in this darkest depth that a small light appears. Not because things have improved, but because when someone has lost everything, they may finally stop. Sometimes the emptiness becomes vast enough to create space for something entirely new to begin. That's why the next level, though the darkest of all, is also the only doorway to real change. Level 7, collapse and the threshold of rebirth. There's a word people who have overcome addiction often use when looking back at the darkest night of their lives. They don't call it failure, they call it hitting rock bottom. And within that phrase lies something strange, both an ending and the beginning of everything. Rock bottom has no single form. For some, it's waking up in a hospital after an overdose, seeing an aging mother sitting beside them, having cried until no tears are left. For others, it's the moment a 7-year-old child asks, "Do you love me?" And the parent cannot answer right away because their mind is occupied with where to find money for the next fix. And for some, it's simply a quiet afternoon alone, staring at their own hands and suddenly not recognizing whose hands they are. At level 7, all the defenses an addict has spent years building collapse at once. The excuses, the justifications, the stories they've told themselves, all fall apart. And for the first time in a long while, They stand face to face with the raw truth about themselves, with nothing left to hide behind and nowhere left to run. This is both the most dangerous moment and the most sacred one. Dangerous because not everyone can withstand everything crashing down at once. Sacred because it is the first time they are truly honest with themselves. Psychology calls this a breaking point or a transformational crisis. Addiction recovery experts have long observed that most people don't truly change when things are still relatively okay. They change when everything has completely shattered, because only when there is nothing left to hold on to do people finally let go. And only when they let go can they reach for something new. Many spiritual traditions around the world, from Buddhism to modern recovery approaches like the 12-step program, point to the same truth. Surrender is not failure. When a person finally admits they can't do it alone, when they say the words, "I need help," after years of carrying everything by themselves, that is not their weakest moment. It is their bravest. A seed cannot grow unless it first breaks open, and people are no different. Sometimes it takes a complete collapse for someone to begin becoming who they truly are. Level 7 is not the end of a person. It is a threshold. On one side lies everything that has been, the wounds, the losses, the years of being lost. On the other side is a different path. Not an easier one, but one that finally has light. And those who manage to cross that threshold often become deeper, kinder, and more understanding of life than those who have never hit rock bottom.